What's up, Wildside besties and baddies? I'm Bailey.
And I'm Chelsea, and we're here to walk you through the wild sides.
From homicides to hosticides and everything in between.
We're so glad you're here, so buckle up
and enjoy the ride. I was telling Chelsea before y'all logged on, I've had a lot of moments this week of like professional growth and development as far as like embarrassing things. And when we hung up on the phone with you guys yesterday, Chelsea and I hung back and we processed it. You know, how did that go? How did you feel? And I was like, I'm so embarrassed and I'm so glad I didn't say anything, because early on in the phone call, Alex, you sounded so much like Chelsea. And I thought you were saying like, oh, I'm such a fangirl. And I was like, oh my God, wow. And I was like, I was this close to being like, Alex, I am so flattered and I don't know what to say. And thank you so much. And then I realized it was,
but I need to hear more.
and then I realized that it was Chelsea, and I was just like, yes.
Okay.
It would have been
okay,
great.
yeah. I was like, I'm so glad I wasn't like, thank you so much. And then you're just like, for what? I was like, for fangirling. And you're like, okay, you're welcome.
It will be me. It will be me as soon as I have a chance to hear more.
Me too.
That's what I was saying when I got on this morning. I'm like, appreciate your guys' approach a lot to what's happening.
Yeah, me too.
Oh, well, thank you. And again, for the thousandth time, we just thank you guys so much for spending and sharing your time with us. When I was reaching out, I had the wild idea of reaching out to y'all because I watched the Bayou Blue documentary, and I was like, I'm going to see if they'll come on the show. And my husband was like, good luck. Good luck. And I talked to Chelsea, and she's the optimistic, and she was like, absolutely.
What does your husband do? Is he cynical for a living?
No, he's more realistic. I'm more nihilistic, so I'm always like, there's no way. There's no way. It's never going to happen. We're not Crime Junkie. We're not any of these big, podcasts. I was like, we're minions. We have to earn our stripes before people want to spend their time on our show. And I reached out, and then you responded, and I was like, oh my God, I got a response. So even then, I was just like, you guys are great. Thank you for responding.
Yeah, look how easy it was.
Oh, that's really nice. Well, to be honest, I mean, we talked about it. We talked about it, and I would say in general, Alex and I's inclination is not to do stuff like this. But your point of view was clearly expressed and kind of generous in spirit and sort of not sensationalistic, which is how we made the film. And so that's what I feel like, yes, this sounds like a great thing to do and help out somebody starting out. And yeah, so I'm very happy to be here.
And we're happy to have you. So again, thank you so much.
And I'm kind of glad that you already started talking about the film, because I kind of wanted you guys, if you don't mind, just give us a little bit about, who you are and what makes you tick, what makes you you.
Yeah, we both disappeared.
Alex, you first.
Oh gosh, I might need something more focused.
I have years of therapy to answer that question. Let me see.
I guess let's maybe say, who are you as far as crime documentaries, true crime? I guess we'll keep it focused on that subject.
I can start and sort of introduce Alex, I think, in answering my question, or answering this question. So I was an actor for years, and was always interested, particularly less in crime and more in sort of social justice and issues of the South and LGBT issues in the South, and became aware of this case actually when it was happening. So I'm from Birmingham, but lived in New York for many years, went to grad school in California, had spent a little bit of time back in Birmingham, and also had an apartment in New Orleans for a while. One of my best friends lives in New Orleans. And I remember this case was happening simultaneously with, there was a serial killer in Baton Rouge, if y'all remember, who was attacking and murdering women, and I think young college-aged women, which of course the media,
Gobbles
you
up.
know, for lack of a better word, they gobble it up, it becomes a huge story. And this story was not being told at all. And so I became really interested in it because of who the victims were and what seemed to me to be a clear, I don't know, disregard for it based on, well, we can talk about that later. So then Alix I met through somebody I was dating at the time. They had done a workshop together of a crime theater piece they were building. And Alix is the one who really is the crime expert, the criminal mastermind. And we got to talking and became very fast friends. And then I sort of exposed her to the story. And I don't know, Alix, if you want to take on from there.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, yeah, we met in Key West, and I was working on this crime-based show where I was interviewing a lot of Key West people around crime, and yeah, I think obviously the subject is something I would be interested in, and David and I did become very close very quickly, and I just felt like I had a long history of wanting to kind of tell stories of people who didn't have another way to tell them or to be heard. So it was a kind of perfect synergistic moment, I think, for me anyway.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I know Bailey had made a comment during our podcast when we were covering it, and she was like, "Can I just say that I'm slightly pissed that we were literally living, probably an hour away or something like that from where this was happening?" And Bailey was like, "We never heard about this." Like,
That is what we heard from absolutely everybody. We don't know this case. We haven't heard about it. David has an eagle eye, and he had been kind of paying attention for years to these string of murders.
And not to mention on that topic, going back to when we were recording the podcast, I was telling Chelsea because she had never heard of it, and we do blind readings, so she doesn't know what I'm talking about for that episode. Because again, we really want to tap into like the genuine responses and talk about the emotions that come up. And I told her, I said, there was literally no national coverage on this case, despite the victim count being 23 men. And Chelsea was like, say that again?
yeah.
And I said, there were 23 victims. And she was like, so they're just going to skip over the fact that we have one of the most prolific serial killers in the state of Louisiana in the history, and nobody's talking about it and nobody knows about it.
And that was what Robert said, the journalist who went to the Times and said, "Hey, look, I think there's a serial killer down here." At the time, I think he had 11 bodies, but that's a lot.
Yeah.
And it was, and the response was, "It's not a national story. We don't want it."
It's not a national story. Yeah. And the thing is, it became such a national story about crime and about poverty and about
climate
class
change and
and
about
race
America.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So I think you guys have touched a little bit on it, and I kind of wanted to ask you, more specifically, like, what was your vision? If you could say, what was your vision? What was your goal for this documentary? What do you think, your big picture, little picture was, I guess, if that makes sense, on what you wanted to express through this documentary?
Do you want to start, David, since you run the story?
Yeah, sure. So Alix is still a much more experienced, both in the arena of crime and also in filmmaking than I was. So in some ways, making the film was an apprenticeship for me and working with her. And what I discovered through it is that I'm quite good at interviewing people, which funnily it's like acting. You have to be in the moment, be ready to respond, all those things. And that sort of is how we ended up kind of breaking down the actual filmmaking process. But I think both of our goals, and Alix, correct me if I'm wrong, was to humanize the victims. They're people generally easy to. It's this language is especially even in the 10 years that we've made it, it's become harder to talk about. But people who generally are at least socially neglected, who do not attract the media's attention. I mean, I would have said who existed in the margins before, but then I don't want to make presumptions about what margins are anymore.
Correct.
So like, it requires me to think about things in different ways and use different languages, or use different language. But to make sure that we humanize people, and I would say as an example of that, the film Four Little Girls, the Spike Lee doc about the Birmingham church bombing, which is a great film. And I had a girl I grew up with, worked on it with him. And what that film did so effectively is it took the girls away from being just symbols to actually human beings. And you saw the families and how this bombing and their deaths affected them. And that is something I really wanted to do with this film, is not talk about numbers, not get into depth psychology of Dominique, not sort of be fascinated by evil, but more by the banality of it, and to let these victims and their families sort of speak for themselves, whether it be through the images or through their family stories, and also really capture the sense of place. I mean, then I think it exploded from there when we got down there. And Alex, maybe you could talk about that.
Yeah, I
But that
mean,
was
I guess I would, the only thing that I would add about what I expect from any documentary project I take on is that I don't want to have an idea of what I think the story is fully until I want to learn what the story is. And so as much homework as we did about the cases, obviously there's an enormous amount that we didn't know. And I don't want to go into the project with a set idea of what it is we're going to put in the final film until we've talked to people and find out who they are and what they have to say.
Just totally open-minded, a clean slate.
I mean, nobody's totally open-minded. I mean, I
Sure.
don't want to pretend that I have some but that was the idea. That's the idea, is
Right.
to listen to people's stories and try and help them tell them.
Okay. When you guys were talking, something that came to my mind, because in Bayou Blue, y'all spent time with some of the victims' families. And I would be curious to hear your perspective of how they were responding to the tragedy, the loss, the violence of their loved one, with a muted social pressure, if you will, from the surroundings. And if you noticed if that impacted how they were responding to their loss. Does that make sense, what
It
I'm
does,
asking?
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Alex.
I mean, I think they weren't a monolith. I think they definitely all responded differently, and we had pretty different experiences with the different family members. They also had, I think you see in the film, different opinions about the death penalty and what should happen to Dominique. I don't know.
I thought, I don't know if this is reductive or not. I thought that there was a certain resignation amongst a lot of the victims' families, both that they weren't surprised it happened, that they weren't surprised it took so long to catch the killer. There was also a rage from some of the family members, particularly the white family, from down the bayou, so to speak, as they would say. The idea that this would happen to them, that the idea that their son would be identified as a homosexual, they were very adamant that that was not the case. So it's really trying to control the narrative of who the victim is, and rage at, I don't know.
There was a lot of anger at the police department from that family. They felt
Yeah.
it hadn't been handled well. They felt that the police were getting accolades or some kind of rewards, but it was very, I think, different from person to person. That one mother-daughter that I think you're talking about, David, they were definitely angry with the police.
Yeah, definitely angry with the police.
Oh, it's just interesting, and sometimes I can't help. My therapist brain just really kicks in and goes into overdrive. But when you were talking about these dynamics and the resignation, it brought me to a question that Chelsea and I wanted to ask regarding the documentary Bayou Blue, and there was a review by Tom Q on Video Librarian talking about how you attempted to find some resonance between the impact of the crimes, Dominique's crimes, and the devastation by Hurricane Katrina, oil spills, and that kind of thing. And he said it kind of came off as a bit of a reach. First of all, I think Chelsea and I can both say that we disagree with that because we are from the Gulf Coast communities. We were affected by Katrina and all of that stuff. But what's fascinating to me when you were talking about the families and again, the resignation is in the counseling dynamic, in the counseling therapy world, we work around a lot with this concept of the dysfunctional family dynamics.
Okay.
And if we go off of that model, there are 6 roles. And the main player in this is what's referred to as the addict. And the world kind of revolves around the addict, and each other, the family member has a role. And I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but what I'm trying to say is everybody in this family system where there is dysfunction all kind of assimilate to this role unknowingly, and the goal is to maintain homeostasis. And when I heard you talking about the families, when you were interviewing them and that kind of spot of them kind of just not knowing what to do with that energy, it sounds a lot like this community of Homa is almost like a macro version of a dysfunctional family dynamic.
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah.
I did feel like it didn't really feel. It was hard to locate a lot of these people, and we found some of them through Facebook. This is also a gift, David. You're a genius at tracking people down. I was impressed. But the point I'm getting at is it didn't feel like there was a community that they were part of, or hadn't, or had available to them to be a part of, really. And I think that is certainly a part of a problem, and certainly related also to other.
And there were, two very different homos. There was sort of the Martin Falls is the journalist. He doesn't ever make the film, right, Alex? No.
We used some of his footage.
We used some of his footage, yeah. But there was this sort of, I don't know, respectable Homa, I guess. And, Homa at the time was kind of a boom town, and had a lot of oil money coming into it. And was, I think they trumpeted themselves as like at least the fastest growing city in Louisiana at the time. And then there was this absolutely sort of devastated poverty with the part of town that was very sort of divided, and there wasn't a sense of a community there, or particularly being in a community at large. But I do agree, like there was a desire to keep things, for all the growth, to keep things static there. And this case particularly turned up a lot of issues, political and social issues.
Also, we spoke to some of the siblings of Dominique who had their own difficulties with not wanting people to know who they were, where they taught, or tried to be.
Understandably.
Yeah, I will say that's one thing that Bailey and I do quite often. Whenever we cover a story, is for those of you who have listened, you hear us say a lot of like, we're not going to share the names of the sisters, the brothers, like, because that's not important. Like, they've been through enough. They deserve privacy, kind of following that same trend of kind of this topical discussion, if you will. Like I said, Bailey and I, we moved to Mississippi from Charlotte, North Carolina. I was in 7th grade. Bailey was in 3rd grade. And I remember at a 7th grade level being in a total culture shock, right? We came from this melting pot of a city. Charlotte was extremely diverse. It was extremely urban. Yes, we lived in, kind of a suburb type of thing, but we got down to that area, and it was very different for us. So this idea of kind of a culture shock, was that difficult for you guys being who you are? And I want to say who you are in the most general term, right? Like, you're not from Homa, you aren't even really from the state of Louisiana, quote unquote, an outsider, if I may be so bold. Was that very challenging? Was that not challenging for you as far as getting information, getting people to talk with you?
Well, David being from the South, I think people were much more interested in talking to him. To be sorry to be,
Yeah, I mean,
and
I
so we use
certainly,
that. We use that a
yeah,
lot.
I did. I mean,
I was going to say, did you have to use that card quite a bit, David, of
yeah,
like, oh, I
yeah,
grew up in Alabama?
yeah. I mean, mostly like, so, you know, I have said, and I stand by this, that the move from Birmingham to New York is much more familiar. Birmingham is more similar to New York than it is to Houma,
I
Louisiana.
can believe
Like
that.
it is, and Houma is yeah, more different than other parts of the South. However, I certainly had much more of a Southern accent. You know, my old accent, kind of talk more like this, and hey y'all, and
Mhm.
sort of. There's a
Right.
kind of
Just slow it
yeah, slow,
down.
and there's a kind
Mhm.
of like a sort of knowing kind of Southern man talk. You know, you kind of talk to
Yes.
people and just keep it short, clipped, and kind of like that. Talk about Alabama football, LSU football, things, all those things. You know,
Right.
certainly open doors for us, and also, and I don't mean this glibly. I mean, I think it's important um, that cultural identifiers and do, you know, create community and connection with people. And so it was, it certainly, I didn't feel like I was a fake. It's certainly part of who I am, but it did,
Correct.
I would say to some degree, especially with the cops, maybe it helped us establish a sense of trust. Dawn, yeah, Dawn,
Mom
yeah,
liked me because she was the only woman in that department.
yeah, she
But
loved
I
you.
think
Yeah.
she said she kind of we were like our approach was if people respond to David, then we're going to put David out in front of them. If people respond to me, then we're going to put me out in front of them. And you know, I think my memory was that Dawn was the main person who kind of turned to me, and most
Yeah.
other people were like, let's talk to this Southern guy.
Yeah. And Dawn, well, Dennis was pretty great with you, Alex,
Dennis
too, if
was
you
good.
remember.
Yeah, he was good.
Yeah. Dennis was the cop. Dawn and Dennis were the two cops who basically got the confession.
Mhm.
Dawn was with the Terrebonne Parish Sheriff's Office, and Dennis was in Jefferson Parish. And they were both, you know, could not have made the film without them. They were both incredibly helpful, and it was to the chagrin, I think, of some of the victims' families. It was, I never felt like it was about them. It was just really about, you know, telling the story, and um, they were great. But yeah, Dawn and Alex, I think, had a real rapport.
Yeah, I liked her
Um,
a lot.
yeah, me too. I liked her too.
But she really went out of her way for us because she helped us with the tapes and she helped
Hmm.
us with, uh, you know, she sent people to some cops when we were filming in the middle of the night at some places that really weren't safe at all.
Yeah,
So that
Mhm.
was pretty nice of her.
yeah.
We talked about this when we were covering, you know, the case from our end. And I thought it was interesting that you guys brought this up. Well, not necessarily you brought it up in the documentary, but you included footage that talked about the disconnect between the parishes,
Hmm.
and there wasn't a lot of good communication. And, you know, that's really a huge, I don't know if you want to call it passion, that's a goal for Bailey and myself, is kind of this interdisciplinary approach with this topic of true crime, you know, bringing in not just crime, but also, you know, Bailey's experience with therapy, things like that. So, how do you feel, you know, kind of being in a place where you really had to rely on multiple characters? Did that kind of strengthen this idea of like it literally takes a village in order to bring change, to bring coverage, to bring news, you know, to the people of the world, if you will?
Hmm.
Does that make sense? Like,
Oh, yeah, it does. I was just saying, Alec. Yeah, I mean, what I remember is specifically about, and I'm not in criminal justice. I don't, you know how hard the work is. I think it's incredibly hard, and there are some wonderful people in it. There are some not wonderful people in it.
Mhm. Mhm.
And what I remember thinking was how the assumptions that I had about how it worked, about different departments talking to each other, about how, say, easy it would be to have a rape kit tested, that there was a functionality that and a communication between all these different departments and jurisdictions, and there just isn't. And it's not because it's because of resources. It's because of at the time, I bet it might be better now. I mean, certainly computers have helped with databases and things like that.
Mhm.
But how, like, they really don't all work together, and and sometimes can work in opposition to each other. And the best thing you can do if you're a victim of a violent crime is advocate for yourself as best you can, or have family advocate for you, because things will disappear. You remember Alex them talking? I think they were talking about the test kits, or like they were just like backlogs and backlog, which everybody knows. I know, but
Yeah.
that was news to me. Like how there was not a codified system, I guess, other than the FBI. Uh, that covers all jurisdictions, and even the FBI doesn't. It was eye-opening how important it is to try to go ahead.
Also, in this case, Katrina hit right in the middle of the 10-year killing span.
And
And so
Rita, yeah, Katrina and
that's a
Rita.
lot of
Yes.
resources that had to, be redirected.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. That's so funny. I mean, it's not funny. None of this is funny, but it's funny that you say that, because my personality is like, oh my gosh, it's not that hard. You just test it. You just pull a rape kit out. You just make a phone call. You send an email. And I've been in situations where it's like, Chelsea, your ignorance is showing,
Yeah.
and I think that is a very common thing for the lay person, for the, listener, if you will, of like, well, if I was involved, if I was running this show, I'd have been, testing everybody. I'd have been searching up databases. And you're like, oh, friend, ha,
Yeah.
you don't really, you don't really understand, and I really appreciated that you guys I feel like you guys allowed that documentary to be very organic. Like, it didn't seem like you guys were really pushing any sort of real personal narrative. Because we've watched documentaries where we're like, oh, okay, that seems like there's a little bit of a hidden agenda. Like, I think you guys did such an amazing job of allowing that community, allowing the people involved, allowing the law department, the police officers, individuals, to really show an authentic self. And I think that's what really drew us to you guys' work and to this documentary. Again, was this idea of, it seemed like you appreciated how people responded, the lifestyle down there, like you wanted to respect that. And I just wish that we saw more of that in our media and documentaries. I'm sorry, I'm giving you guys like a ton of compliments right now.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you.
That's very nice.
I just really was so, I just cannot tell you how much I am like, thank you for such a raw, genuine experience that we were lucky enough to experience through you guys. Am I correct on that? Did it seem like you guys were allowing that to kind of naturally happen
Yeah, I mean, I
as
think
far as the filming?
what I was trying to get at a little earlier was that's my hope, or so that means a lot to hear it from you. It's, is to approach something without going in there with what it is we want to paste all over it, but just actually listen and see what is happening.
Yeah, 2 ears, 1 mouth, man. If we could remember that we have 2 ears and we should listen twice as much as we talk. I have to
And
remind
I
myself.
think in some ways we discovered that kind of the least interesting character is Ronald Dominique.
Yes.
He
Yes.
just is a awful, sad piece of shit. And
Can I just can I give a clap for that, David? I'm really trying to, we always try to be very professional, but what did Bailey, what did you say? I hate to say it again, but you were like, he's a baby back bitch.
yeah,
I can't remember, but
No,
I know.
I said I don't know how to call him a dumb fat fuck without fat shaming, because it was like I wanted to attack him where it hurt, because that's what he did. But I also don't want to jeopardize like my value system of trying to be this, like, not a neutral person, but just a person who can look at things from all angles. That's a big value for myself. And I noticed as I was recording that podcast, I wanted to be like, like, this piece of shit, man. And then I was like, hold on, Bailey, that's not very professional.
Yeah.
He's a human as well. And you know what I mean? And it's really difficult balance to strike.
Well, I think for us
So
also, we are very like anti-predatorial behavior. Like it really, really burns our bread
Mm.
when people are predators. You know what I mean? I'm like, you are such a path of least resistance, dude. Like,
Yeah.
shame on you for going after, like, you knew that these people probably wouldn't be missed, quickly. You were just going after, like, pick on somebody your own size type of thing, if you will. And it was just, it was gut wrenching. And I'm like, we kind of laugh. My key phrase a lot of times is get a better hobby than being a predator over these, again, not to use that word marginalized, but these people that, it's like, what you're doing and you're taking advantage of people who are already being taken advantage of. Like they're
Yeah.
already at kind of the bottom of this totem pole. And it's just disgusting human behavior. But I'll digress. I don't want to rant on that.
Yeah, and I certainly know what you mean, Bailey, in terms of, not dehumanizing people and using language like he was a monster and things like that. And it's, my inclination is the same, like is to not dehumanize
it's
anybody,
hard.
even when they so consistently dehumanize other people, and rape and murder them. With him, there was a term that was used, Alex. Do you remember the patheticism?
Oh, of course I do.
Yeah.
We love this word, patheticism.
I love that word so much.
And Alex, can you maybe speak to, like, I can't remember exactly what was said, but I think Dawn used it.
He did. They said, he's going to show up in court. People who patheticism, they'll show up in court weaker and weaker and weaker, and like trying to seem like they couldn't possibly. And that's what he did. He showed up with a walker and like a wheelchair, and there was a lot of like, how could he possibly be in a position to be this person because he's exhibiting so much patheticism.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you just have to, physically remind yourself, like, this man, is pathetic in one meaning of the word, but he is quite capable in another, in a really horrific way. And it serves everyone well to not underestimate that,
Yeah,
right?
because in fact he wasn't overpowering them. He was convincing them to voluntarily be tied up.
He's paid
So
too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oof.
One of the things that I wanted to kind of segue, a big question, and I think it's a topic that the four of us might overlap with, is kind of getting into going back to the documentary and piggybacking off of what Chelsea said about you guys doing a really great job of allowing the viewers to take in all of the information and understand the story, focus on the victims and not sensationalizing Ronald Dominique. And what I've noticed, and this is just what I make up in my perspective, is some of the reviews for the documentary are kind of like, what it translates in my brain is it wasn't sensationalized. You guys didn't show pictures of deceased victims. You didn't show, interviews with Ronald Dominique, because that's getting into, I think, how this genre of true crime has really turned into, is we want this, like, quote unquote juicy story.
Yeah, it's a gluttonous approach almost.
Yeah. And, and to be totally honest and be human, I've fallen victim to that myself, and in my history in my relationship with watching and consuming true crime things. But obviously the older I get, and since I've become a therapist over the last decade, that's really changed my approach, and hence why Chelsea and I are trying to do this interview style podcast of bringing in professionals to, yes, we'll tell a story, but we're not going to sensationalize it, and we're going to give you information, education, prevention, if all possible. And so my question with all of that, my question to you guys is, based off of your experience with Bayou Blue and just your experience in general, what do you think we, the collective we, Chelsea, me, Alex, David, and everybody listening, what can we do to make true
Yeah.
crime more ethical?
I th-
I don't know.
Alex is Alex, I would think you would be the one to speak to this.
Yeah, but I don't have a good I mean, I do the best I can for the projects that, I'm generating, but there's the whole world out there making true crime stuff, and I can't speak or do anything about them.
Right.
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, like particularly in the podcast world, which you guys are in, there is such, and yeah, me too. I've certainly fallen for it, and even stuff that isn't sensationalistic at all. Like I remember the first season of Serial, I was overwhelmingly compelled by it, but you do lose sight of the victim, and I don't know. I mean, there's such a need for content, especially with all these streaming services. And like my husband, for example, loves cult documentaries. They're great, and I love them too.
Yeah.
And there's some really good ones, and there's some not good ones.
Mhm.
And you can tell. I don't know. You can just tell tonally what the approach is. I think pretty quickly. But I don't know. There's always been sensationalism. There always will be. We certainly elected not to go that route, and I think probably paid a price for it.
Yeah, but we talked about it and we knew
Yeah, we did. I mean, it was a
what kind
very
of price
conscious
we'd be
decision.
paying.
Yeah, but we knew we were limiting ourselves and limiting our audience, but it was important to us.
We did it, we had those photographs. We could have included them. I
Mhm.
feel like they were pretty horrible, and
Yeah.
it's hard to listen to the whole story when you're like slapped in the face with a shocking image like that.
Right. That's true. And that kind of leads me to my final question. So it's been, over a decade since you guys filmed Bayou Blue. And if you could do it again, if you could take on this project again, would you take it on again?
Oh yes,
Sure.
yeah. I mean, I think that I would be braver. I think now than I was then. I was a chicken.
What do you mean by
Like,
that?
and I leaned on Alex for courage.
You were great. You did great.
Oh well, thank you. But I mean, it's hard. It was hard for me to go into some of these places and to ask these questions and to ask people to help us, and I would just get scared. Like even like all those shots when we were driving down those country roads in the dark, I was like legit got the creeps. Like
No,
like I really,
it's
it
creepy.
was
It's
real
like,
creepy.
It
hey,
is.
there's something on here.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
Bayou country, it's dark, it's unfamiliar. Yeah,
But I
there's
would say I would be bolder. I would probably be bolder in some of my questions to law enforcement. And maybe the other thing I would do, I think, and this is where we struggled with, because we did struggle with the sensationalist aspect. I would love to go back, even now, and get sort of a sense of the other side of town. There's a sort of corollary film to be made. I mean, I bet you, I have no evidence for this, but I bet you if you went back to Homa now and went to the Target and asked people who Ronald Dominique was, most of them would not know. What do you think, Alex?
I think they would not know.
Yeah.
I also think that, the victims' families, a lot of them, they weren't on the internet. They didn't have really access to newspapers even. Like, so, Dawn talked about walking around with actual physical flyers, after hours to try and tell people what was going on. But I think that there isn't a at your fingertips amount of information that maybe we're used to having every day.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think everybody would say, I don't know who he is.
Yeah. And he's still alive. He was not so pathetic after all, I guess.
that just I know that just goes back to what we talked about at the beginning, but it just blows my mind because Homa is a lot like where Chelsea and I grew up. It's a very small town vibe, kind of a good old boy system kind of vibe.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody knows everybody knows everything about everybody. And so it makes me wonder just like how thick this veil of denial is, because there is no way that these people do not know about what happened, like factually, but I think this veil of, if you don't look at it, you don't talk about it, it's not
Yeah.
there, and you continue living in this like societal comprised bubble wrap of, target bullshit without actually addressing the issues around it. Ah, it
Yeah.
just blows my mind.
And I know that happens everywhere, right? Like every community, I'm sure, has its level of it. But again, I just so distinctly remember, like I said, moving down there and asking questions about some of the culture and some of the tension that I felt and that I saw that was completely foreign to me. And I remember specifically asking, why? Like, why is there tension? Why is this happening? Why do people think this way or act this way? And they were like, because that's just the way it is, Chelsea. Like, I just remember having that response of, it's just the way it is.
Yeah.
And again, I think that's another reason why I appreciated what you guys did, is I think it showed a little bit of that aspect of the quote unquote, just the way it is, but then also being bold and brave enough to bring attention to, like, it doesn't have to be. Right? Like, people can grow, people can learn, people can become more culturally competent. And we've got to embrace some of that if we are ever going to grow and learn and be better as a person, as a people, as a society. And I hate to say, especially in those areas, because again, I'm sure that there are multiple areas throughout the US, throughout the world that are that way. But again, I just really applaud you guys' bravery, if you will. I know that's a dramatic word, but of going down there and exposing a lot of this, exposing the culture, exposing that, yes, we do have a lot of sexism, we have homophobia, we have this stuff, and it's damaging, and it doesn't have to be this way.
And not even on a micro level, but like systematically, I should say.
We did
Right?
encounter, David mentioned the sexism yesterday, and we did encounter people who would we'd be explaining the case because they hadn't heard of it. And then we'd say that the victims were men. There was one person said, men raping and killing women, I understand, but men, not to me. It was like, oh, I
Yeah.
don't know where to go with that. But
You're like, I don't really know what to say to this.
we got a lot of that kind of like surprise and that, yeah, that revealed a fair amount of other kinds of isms.
And I remember too, and I'm sure all three of y'all are very familiar with this behavior, but it was eye-opening for me. I would ask a question, or Alex would ask a question, and they would answer me. They would look to me and answer. It was
Right.
all almost across the board, particularly with the law enforcement. Do you remember that, Alex?
But I gotta say, that happens.
Yeah, it happens all the time.
That's not the only film that's happened.
Yeah, I think it's pretty common, sadly. But it was it was very true down there. And I also there's there are problems everywhere. There are certainly stories that are unique to the South. Yeah, there's stories unique to upstate New York too, where I spend a lot of time, and Maryland, I'm sure, and et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. Well, like I said, that's really a lot of what Bailey and I are in a weird way, in a good way, in a bad way. I don't know which way it is, but that's kind of what we want to do, is we want to cover and we want to reach out and we want to expose the stuff. Like, yeah, sure, everybody can talk about Dahmer, we can talk about Bundy and Gacy and all these people.
And Ed Kemper and all of the...
And I'm going to say I would love to talk about Ed Kemper. He's quite fascinating. But I'll digress. But we really, really have a heart and a passion for, again, looking into the lesser than, the island of misfit toys, if you will. I don't know how to describe it, but it's like I said, it kind of makes it feel in a weird way like we're not the only ones out there. And again, that's another thing that really inspired us about Alex, you and David, is like, man, there are more people who think like us. There are more people who want to look into the lesser than, the not as sensational, the possibly forgotten side of this stuff. So,
I mean, the thing that's kind of interesting is that it's it's pretty fucking, excuse
No,
my
please.
language, sensational for, like if you look at the facts of the case, it's very
It
sensational.
should have been.
So it's kind of interesting to, for people to like be like, it has to be more. I'm like, really? He killed all these people. Like, it's pretty dramatic.
It has all the points of it. It just, like you said, what was it that, David, were you saying that, or where did I hear it, that someone brought it to the news and they were like, yeah, that's just not really what we want to cover.
That reporter in Homa, Robert, right?
Alex, yeah.
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 He was in New Orleans, actually. Yeah, and was a hyper-local journalist in New Orleans. And then took it to the New York Times, and they said it's not a national story.
So I guess really the only thing that I want, I do a lot of the like, okay, this is the last one. Okay, bye. Okay, bye. But what are you guys working on? We've talked a lot about, this, and I just thank you so much for your insight and for your words on the work that you did and giving some clarity to that. But what are you guys working on now? What are you excited about? What are some of your projects?
That was going to be my question, was like, okay, so now what are you guys up to? What are you doing? Any big plans that you wanted to share here?
Coming out of the pandemic, I'm working on a sort of narrative stuff with some friends, actor friends up here, about people who fled New York City during the pandemic and moved to Hudson River Valley, and tentatively titled Cityids.
Ah, very
nice.
cool. Is
Yeah.
this going to be kind of a documentary type of
No. It's narrative.
narrative? Okay,
No.
gotcha.
Yeah, it's total narrative. Yeah.
Gotcha.
I've spent a lot of the pandemic interviewing Irish people about crime in Ireland. I'm slowly putting it together as it'll be, well, documentary in the sense of nonfiction, but it'll be like theater, book, different iterations of these interviews.
Very cool. Very cool. Oddly enough, I had to do a project comparing two countries on their health systems, and Ireland and South Africa were the two countries that I ended up comparing.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, man, Ireland, you guys, like, their population is growing. They just kind of included dental into like a national I guess interest. Like, they're really becoming more interested in the dental care of the people of Ireland. So not that is really relevant to anything that you're saying, but I was like, hey, I just had to do some research on Ireland.
Well, and Chelsea's a dental hygienist, so anytime that like anything with teeth or mouth or oral hygiene comes up, she's like, let me tell you something. Ooh.
My brother-in-law is a dentist.
Oh, fun. Oh, fun. It's an
Yeah.
interesting, oh man, it's an interesting field. Someone should do a documentary on
Alex.
on the life of being in dentistry. You want to talk about true
Yeah.
crime, man. I think going to the dentist is like a criminal activity times for people.
Is it safe?
I know people, it's
Yeah.
very uncomfortable. It's very, very, very uncomfortable. So,
Yeah.
well, when do you guys have a tentative date for us to be looking forward to releases or anything that we can look at, buy, purchase, like, follow, anything
Not
like that?
yet.
Okay.
Not yet. No.
Okay.
Yeah. No.
But we'll keep our eyes peeled for it, right?
Yes.
What about you guys? What is your timeline with your podcast?
So we have got some really, and y'all are going to hear me totally nerd out, and I want to be respectful of your time since you asked, but we've got some really cool things going on. I do a lot of research naturally for the podcast episodes, and just because Chelsea and I are kind of nerds anyway. But all of the podcasts, the true crime genre podcasts that I found that were interview style, they really stuck to this well-beaten path of interviewing detectives, interviewing criminologists, which is fascinating, don't get me wrong, but it's still very much tied into the criminal piece. And Chelsea and I really wanted to broaden our horizons, and so we touched base with a gentleman who, just like as kind of a wild example, he is a zoologist and he is an expert in cannibalism. And so the questions are not going to be we're not going to be asking about, victims who died via, with when there was cannibalism involved. It's really more about understanding what is that from a evolutionary standpoint. Can you educate us on like different species and cannibalism? And then we talked to a gentleman who I think we're going to interview pretty soon, and he is like the leader, the expert in factitious disorders. So Munchausen by proxy,
Mm.
malingering. I talked to a gentleman who's going to come on the show who is an underwater criminal investigator. And I didn't even know that was a thing. And so I want to pull individuals from these niches, doctors, clinicians, zoologists, researchers, reporters, survivors, anything, and just shed some light on their perspective and not necessarily talking about like a crime or again, not to overuse the word, but like the sensational piece to it.
Mm-mm.
But for our listeners to listen to an episode about something, and then we have an interview with a professional to really educate our listeners and get them to see it from a professional standpoint. And so at the end of the day, my goal is our listeners walk away instead of just with the saturated nervous system, they're going to walk away with, wow, did you know that this means this, or that this became this, or this is the etiology or the history of this? And they're going to know more, have more knowledge, have more education and understanding. So if they do decide to do something productive in this world and in society, we hopefully, Wildside, will be a part of that.
Cool.
That's great.
Excellent.
And we're just, also wanting to bring, every episode we try to end it with, you are worthy, you are loved. It's kind of like, what is that movie, The Help, where it's like, you is kind, you is important. Like,
Yeah.
it's like such a sweet sentiment. But again, really bringing, especially since I don't think anybody knew what post-pandemic world was going to be like, right? I mean, everybody's like, oh,
Yeah.
2020 COVID, that was so long ago. And it's like, yeah, but it wasn't. And people are still
Yeah.
really struggling. People are still really having a hard time. And so we again want to bring an air of positivity, but also an air of empowerment of like, you can be an advocate. You can be an advocate. We give a lot of resources on if you're struggling with suicidal thoughts, if you're struggling with some form of sex addiction or fantasy. Like, there are therapists, there are people. You're not alone. There are lots of people who would love to be in that darkness with you. And we just want people to be seen. We want people to be heard in a time where, I don't know. I just feel like it's very, very important for people to feel like they have somebody in their corner, even if it's just a voice
Community.
on a podcast, like,
Mhm.
Yeah.
so that's really kind of both of our mission, our goal. And we just, kind of like Alex, we're interested in true crime, and it kind of is interesting to us. And but then also bringing, the beautiful things that happen as a result of true crime. And that can be very like head scratching, like what beautiful, what can come from the ashes of it.
Like changes in legislature and stuff like that, that advocates, like family member or family of victims, and they advocate for that and literally implement new laws. I mean, it's just amazing some of the work that people can do. That's us.
So,
Great. Thanks, you guys. Thank you so much for reaching out to us. I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Well, thank
Yeah.
you for agreeing to come on, and thank you guys for being fangirls of us. We really
Anytime.
we really appreciate that. Makes my day. Thank you so
Well,
much.
thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll keep our listeners posted for if Alex, David, whenever you guys release any new cool things that you guys are working on, we're always going to be here as a voice of support
Yeah.
for you guys. And just because you've been so gracious and so kind and so loving and wonderful to us, and we want to repay
Thank
that
you.
however we can moving forward.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Ultimately, thank you. Thank you for
Yeah.
being you. Thank you for being you. And we appreciate what you're doing, big and small. And just, again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Hey, Wildside Tribe, don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Wildside Podcast.
Make sure to tune in on Wildside Wednesdays. New episodes will drop each Wednesday at 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time.
We would love to hear from you, so if you have a wild case recommendation, email us at wildsidepodcast@gmail.com. That's wildside with a C. Or share your thoughts in the comments below.
As always, if you haven't heard it today, you're loved, you're worthy, and you're valuable. And we'll catch you on
The flip side.